Hello book lovers, welcome to Uncommon Reader. I'm Daniela and this video is dedicated to The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain, which was my buddy read with Reney of Beyond Books and Mimi of It's Mimi Duong. You will find for sure Reney's video link in my info box. We're yet not sure if Mimi is going to do a specific video on this book, but she was sharing some difficulties in reading and approaching the story. But in case she comes up with a dedicated video, you will find that as well in the info box. So this wasn't an easy read, but at the same time, I have to say it was quite interesting, at time very tough, especially for the use of the language, not only because it's written in some English, formal English, but we'll also come across 5 different Southern dialects, and the writing is pretty much incomprehensible. So I think that the listening to the audiobook really helped me put the words and the audio together to speed up the process of reading. But of course, also the topics on this book, it's quite hard to digest, and most especially the racism, the slavery. So we'll get to the story. I wasn't completely happy with my experience in trying to understand certain aspects of the character, especially Huckleberry Finn, and later on we'll meet again Tom Sawyer in the book. So I did a little research online and I found a very interesting podcast, although it's in Italian, so unfortunately I can't really share with you unless you know Italian. So you will find a link on of this podcast in the info box. And the man that actually was narrating and probably the creator of this podcast is Mario Maffi, who teaches Anglo-American culture at the university in Milan. So it really made me understand more what Mark Twain wanted to convey with this book, and have my glasses on because I will rely on his notes. So I really wanted to share because I feel like certain things I couldn't really understand without the help of this awesome podcast. So first of all, a few curious facts on Huckleberry Finn, the novel. It was first published in London in 1884 and later in New York the year after. The novel was the natural sequel of The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, but it soon becomes something more and something different that we all pretty much realize. If we read first Tom Sawyer and then this book, this is actually my journey with Mark Twain. So this something different is an evident sign from the author of a progressive non-reconciliation with America. It is no coincidence that the Concord, Massachusetts Public Library will immediately ban the novel, considering it reprehensible, immoral, and uneducational. I'm going to put the book down. So why uneducational? Well, first of all, in an era in which the book market was flooded with edifying novels with angelic boys and girls as protagonists, respectful of the rules, blessed with the fundamental American virtues of resourcefulness, honesty, and business acumen, Mark Twain offers his readers a portrait of an outsider who smokes, curses, barefoot, sleeps in a barrel, breaks grammatical and social rules, and he refuses authority, and even goes so far to help a runaway slave. So not only the whole story is narrated by the lively, unprejudiced, and innocent voice of Huck in a slang that, for the first time, emerges with such intensity in an American novel made up of many different dialects, referring to the many social strata of the country, the patchwork of the languages, of the cultures, of the classes of America. The story is set in St. Petersburg in Missouri, and we are in the pre-Civil War America. Huck lives sometimes with his abusive father, sometimes he's entrusted in the loving care of the widow Douglas, who wants to domesticate him, send him to school, and sometimes he's looked after by his aunt Sally. None of these arrangements make him happy, so he decides to fake his own death and set off with a raft along the river. So the first night he lands on a little island and he meets Jim. He's the slave of Miss Douglas, the widow. He escaped because he wanted to be reunited with his family. So they sort of decide to go on this trip together. Their goal is to reach the confluence of the Mississippi and Ohio rivers and sail up north to reach the non-slave states. They travel by night and they rest during the day. And during their journey, they will be facing various dangers, like the appearance of the Duke and the King. Those were their nicknames. A couple of swindlers and fake preachers who managed to get on the raft and take possession of it. So the dangers they face, they end up bonding the two and finding trust and courage in one another. And we witness Huck gradually abandoning the prejudice he harbored against Jim. As a child, he was raised, in a slave state, so he didn't know any better. And it is precisely his instinctive perception of reality that allows him, through a continuous, direct confrontation with his own sincere heart, to free himself from external codes and conditioning. We see, for example, his inner turmoil at the moment he writes Jim's letter of denunciation and must decide to deliver it. So this letter, first he thought it was the right thing to do because Jim was escaping. So by the law, the good thing to do would be to report him. So here how Huck Finn changes his mind the minute he writes the letter. This is the short note. Miss Watson, your runaway N, I can't pronounce the N word. It's just like so annoying, just a horrible word. Your runaway N Jim is down here 2 miles below Pikesville, and Mrs. Phelps has got him and he will give him up for the reward if you send. Huck Finn. I felt good and all washed clean of sin for the first time I had ever felt so in my life, and I knowed I could pray now, but I didn't do it straight off, but laid the paper down and sat there thinking how good it was all this happened so, and how near I come to being lost and going to hell, and went on thinking. I got to thinking over our trip down the river, and I see Jim before me all the time, in the day and in the nighttime, sometimes moonlight, sometimes storms, and we are floating along, talking and singing and laughing. But somehow I couldn't seem to strike no places to harden me against him, but only the other kind. I'd see him standing my watch on top of his'n, instead of calling me so I could go on sleeping, and see him how glad he was when I come back out of the fog, and when I come back to him again in the swamp, up there where the feud was, and such like times, and would always call me honey and pet me and do everything he could think of for me, and how good he always was. And at last I struck the time I saved him by telling the man we had smallpox aboard, and he was so grateful and said I was the best friend old Jim ever had in the world, and the only one he's got now. And then I happened to look around and see that paper. It was a closed place. I took it up. I held it in my hand. I was trembling because I got to decide forever betwixt two things, and I knowed it. I studied a minute, sort of holding my breath, and then says to myself, all right then, I'll go to hell, and tore it up. It was awful thoughts and awful words, but they was said, and I let them stay said, and never thought no more about reforming. I shoved the whole thing out of my head and said I would take up wickedness again, which was in my line, being brought up to it, and the other weren't. And for a starter, I would go to work and steal Jim out of slavery again. And if I could think up anything worse, I would do that too, because as long as I was in, and in for good, I might as well go the whole hog. So what I feel is that, this stereotype or preconceptions that Huck had growing up, just spending time with Jim really made him think where the good was. So let me continue with Maffi's podcast. So here's Huck's sincere heart, the loyal heart. And it is this good heart that allows him to connect with people, to speak in many real and metaphorical languages. And he doesn't keep quiet even when Tom Sawyer reappears and takes center stage, momentarily pushing him into the background in that pre-finale that many critics consider the novel's weakest point. And I have to agree on this because I think the part where Tom Sawyer comes up and he's trying to change things up in terms of Jim was in prison and he was trying to find a very complicated escamotage to free him instead of, doing a normal thing. So that really was so annoying. And you just notice the difference between Huck being more reflective, more responsible, more empathic, and Tom Sawyer just caring for adventures. So it was an interesting parallel between the two characters. And Maffi says, it is precisely this ability to connect with so many different people that constitutes one of the most vital traits of the character of Huck Finn. This merciless fresco of American society will be passed on to a specific American literary genre. We will find it in Jack London's Tale of the Great North, in some characters in George Willard's, in Hemingway, in Salinger, in Jack Kerouac. And all these authors have created outsiders with sincere hearts capable of tuning into others' wavelengths and functioning as vital bridges between individuals otherwise isolated in the vastness and solitude of America. It is no surprise then that Hemingway himself, in his novel Green Hills of Africa, has one of his characters say that all of the 20th century American literature stems from a novel called Huckleberry Finn. Well, we knew that Mark Twain was one of the pioneers of a certain way of writing, but definitely, pointing out that Huckleberry Finn was it really makes sense after having grasped more information about this book. And here's some more reflections on Maffi, because he is explaining how villages and the river have specific importance in the book. They represent something, like they are characters themselves. Around Huck and Tom, Maffi says, Twain paints a vast multicolored canvas, almost one of those panoramas that were so popular at the time and were already a prelude to cinema. The villages represents the advancing civilization and at the same time reveal its human and social misery. The tangle of barbaric rituals, neuroses and obsessions, sentimentality and falsehood, authentic pretext for reflecting on the America of the time in which the story is set, before the Civil War, of course, but also in the time in which the novel was written, after the Civil War, on European legacies, on Southern culture, on racism, on religion, on the devastating role of money, on the dominating ideology, and these villages themselves express unforgettable characters. For example, we find the Shepperson and the Grangeford engaged for years in a grotesque, bloody feud. So many deaths, so many brutal murders in this adventure novel. Young Emily with her glowing romantic poems, the Duke and the King with their theatrical blunders and skillful deception, Colonel Sherburne with his superhuman temptations. Every time Huck sets foot on land, very important point, it's as civilization has the upper hand over him and Jim and their relationship, which on the raft has shifted from equals, becomes unbalanced. So every time the two are in the raft, the horizon clears and one breathes the scent of freedom. It's therefore not surprising that Mark Twain, at a certain point in his writing, having reached that chapter 16 in which a steamboat crashes the raft, splitting the two for some time, leaves the novel unfinished for 7 years before resuming it in 1883 and finishing it within a few months. The book has taken a very different direction from the initial one and was no longer a novel about adventures like Tom Sawyer. And then the river, the great Mississippi River, which becomes an element in constant, vivid relationship with the story and the souls of the two protagonists, and the timeless place where differences are erased, where freedom is expressed to the highest degree. Even among Jim, a sense of brotherly bond is born, but it is also a place of overwhelming floods and insidious fogs, crossed by enemies and scoundrels, dotted with threats and dangers, and at times it almost becomes a projection of the doubts, uncertainty, even treachery of individuals. In depicting this almost human entity, Mark Twain offers us another powerful elaboration of the theme of nature, so central to American literature, a nature that remains ambiguous, loved, hated, a place of endless delights, thanks to which we can retrace the course of time and memory towards a primordial innocence as an alternative to the suffocating civil society, but also a ground for supreme trials in which the individual can be crushed and innocence can recede in the face of wickedness. The river then seems to dictate the very structure of the book, flowing clear and majestic. It experiences uncertainty, as it does in the final chapter, every time it moves away from the river until it reaches that open ending, the true ending of the book, where, like the waters that never cease to flow and mingle with the sea, Huck declares that his quest for freedom isn't over yet. All the freshness and charm of Huckleberry Finn resides in this identification of the river with the book. But there is also something more, which makes the novel a very different work from the one that preceded it and from which it originally sprung. A limpid and dark novel, at once brimming with confidence and joy of life, and at the same time anguished, haunted by dozens of shadows. The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn marks the loss of those visual and ideological illusions, demonstrating the author and his readers' confrontation with the true reality of America at that time and his constant need to go beyond appearances. Perhaps this is why the novel was immediately banned and remains one of the most significant and problematic works of American fiction, as Ernest Hemingway rightly noted. We mentioned him before. So I feel this podcast really helped me clear the air on certain aspects of the book. The racism and the bigotry, it's so evident. Twain really wanted to portray that side of America, that bigotry of that time. And that's why probably, it was banned for a long time because no one wanted to see those aspects of the country. Overall, the read is tough at times because of the language issues, but As a lover of language, I have to say languages, dialects really entertain me. I was also trying to read aloud sometimes and fake the southern accent. So I really enjoy that part of the book actually. And so I welcomed learning more about, cultures and part of America that I don't know really well. Mario Maffi also wrote a few books about the Mississippi area, and unfortunately they're not translated in English, but I will leave a cover of one book that he wrote on Mississippi. And I think the only translation available, according to Goodreads, is in French. So I was really happy to discover this podcast because it gave me so many more perspectives on how to approach this book. And even after I read it, it really helped me understand more what Mark Twain wanted to convey. I also appreciated how the river was such a symbol in the book, as well as the villages, representing society. So I think I got way more out of the book now. So I hope you enjoyed this video and found these notes interesting. I look forward to chat more with you in the comments. And I encourage you to watch Reney's video and maybe possibly Mimi's as well if she ends up doing it. You will find the links in the info box. Thank you. I'll see you soon here on Come Reader. In the meantime, happy reading. Ciao.